By the time the elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, Claudette Ozzie had already decided she wasn't going to say a word about what had happened downstairs. She walked to her suite, set her laptop bag on the credenza, and stood at the window for a long moment looking out at the Atlanta skyline. The sun was going down. The city looked the way it always did at that hour, like something that didn't know it was beautiful. She thought about calling her daughter. She didn't. She sat on the edge of the bed instead, still in her coat, and stared at the carpet. The carpet was cream-colored, expensive. The kind of carpet that absorbed sound and made the room feel sealed off from everything outside it. She had stayed in this hotel 4 times in the past 2 years. She had spent, she calculated without really meaning to, somewhere close to $11,000 within its walls. She knew the name of the restaurant on the ground floor, the name of the concierge who always remembered her coffee order, the name of the general manager who had once sent a handwritten note to her room after a particularly long stay. She knew all of that, and yet, downstairs, 40 minutes ago, a woman behind the front desk had looked at her and decided she didn't belong. It had started the way those things always start, quietly, with a small door closing where a door should have opened. Claudette had arrived at the Hargrove, Atlanta, just before 5 in the afternoon, coming directly from the airport in the back of a car she'd arranged herself, wearing the same clothes she'd worn on the flight from San Francisco. Dark jeans, a gray turtleneck, a coat she'd owned for 6 years, and had no intention of replacing because it still fit perfectly and kept her warm, and that was what a coat was supposed to do. Her carry-on was a single soft-sided bag, black, no logo. She traveled light. She had always traveled light. The lobby of the Hargrove, Atlanta, was the kind of lobby that made you feel like you were supposed to move through it a certain way. The floors were marble. The floral arrangements were taller than most people. There was a bar to the left where men in suits sat with glasses that were never quite empty. Claudette had crossed that lobby more times than she could count, and it had never made her feel anything in particular. She went to the front desk. There were 2 agents on. One of them, a woman, early 30s, blonde hair pulled back with the kind of precision that takes considerable effort to achieve, was finishing a call. The other was helping a couple check in. Claudette waited. The woman behind the desk looked up. Something moved behind her eyes, a small adjustment, a recalibration. And then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that arrived before the decision to actually be friendly had been made. "Checking in," she said. "Yes," Claudette said. Ozzie. Claudette Ozzie, I have a reservation." The woman, her name tag said Kristen, typed something, looked at the screen, typed something else. The smile held, but the quality of it changed slightly. "I'm not finding that reservation," she said. "It was booked through the Hargrove Preferred program," Claudette said. "Diamond tier. The confirmation number is in my email if you need it." Kristen typed again. Claudette noticed she wasn't actually reading the screen so much as performing the act of reading it. "I'm not showing a Diamond account under that name," she said. "Are you sure it wasn't booked under a company name?" "It's under my name," Claudette said, "as it always is." The couple next to her finished checking in and moved toward the elevators with their key cards and their matching luggage, and the particular ease of people who have never been made to feel like an inconvenience. Kristen watched them go. Then she looked back at Claudette with the same practiced smile and said, "I can try to see if there's something available at our standard rate. We do have a queen room on 17, though I should let you know that it's—" "I reserved a suite," Claudette said. "I always reserve a suite. I've stayed here 4 times in the past 2 years. If you look at the account history under that name, you'll see it." Kristen looked at the screen. Then she looked at Claudette. And this was the moment, this was the thing that Claudette would turn over in her mind for the rest of that evening. The woman tilted her head very slightly to one side, the way people do when they're about to say something they've already decided is reasonable, and said, "Ma'am, I want to help you, but I do need to verify that the reservation exists before I can assign a room at that level. Could you perhaps check with whoever made the booking?" Whoever made the booking. Claudette had made the booking. She made all her own bookings. She had done so for 31 years, since the first time she'd traveled for work at the age of 22 with $40 in her checking account and a regional sales conference in Columbus, Ohio. She was terrified she didn't deserve to attend. She said none of that. She pulled out her phone. She found the confirmation email. She turned the screen toward Kristen. Kristen glanced at it. "I'll need to enter the confirmation number directly," she said. Could you read it out to me?" Claudette read it out. Kristen typed. And then something happened that Claudette had not expected. The reservation came up, exactly as booked, with her name on it. The suite on the 42nd floor, 4 nights, diamond loyalty rate, the notation that said preferred guest, return visitor, coffee preference on file, black, no sugar. There was a silence. "Oh," Kristen said. And then, "I apologize for the confusion. It looks like there was a system lag." She reached for a key card sleeve. "Let me get you set up." Claudette didn't say anything. "Is there anything you need for your stay?" Kristen asked. The tone had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of shift that happens when someone realizes they've made an error but doesn't want to name the error directly. "No," Claudette said. "Thank you." She took the key cards and walked toward the elevator. She didn't look back. What Kristen didn't know, what the lobby didn't know, what the marble floors and the 2 tall flower arrangements didn't know, was that Claudette Osies had arrived in Atlanta for a reason. She was scheduled to appear the following morning on a panel at the National Technology Investment Forum, which was being held 2 blocks away at the convention center, and which drew, every year, somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 attendees. Venture capitalists, fund managers, institutional investors, startup founders, and the particular subset of financial journalists who understood that the real stories in tech were rarely the ones that got covered first. Claudette had been invited to speak not as a guest, but as a keynoter. She had been introduced, in the program, as the founder and chief executive of OC Infrastructure Solutions, a firm she had started 11 years ago out of a 2-bedroom apartment in East Oakland with $12,000 in savings, and a contract she'd spent 8 months pursuing and almost lost twice. The firm now operated in 27 states. It had, in the past fiscal year, processed over $4 billion in infrastructure project finance. She was by any reasonable measure one of the most influential people at that conference. She was also, at the moment, a black woman in a gray turtleneck standing alone in an elevator in a hotel that had just made her feel like a problem to be solved. She pressed 42. The doors closed. The panel the next morning was at 9. Claudette was up at 5:30, the way she always was. She made coffee from the machine in the suite and sat with it at the desk while the city came back to light below her. She answered 12 emails. She reviewed her notes, though she didn't really need the notes. She knew what she was going to say. She had been saying versions of it for years. She showered. She dressed. She chose, with full awareness of what she was choosing, the clothes she always wore to speak. A tailored charcoal blazer, dark slacks, a simple white shirt. She wore the same watch she had worn to every significant meeting of her professional life. A Tag Heuer her mother had given her when she closed her first major contract. Her mother had saved for 2 years to buy it. Claudette had not been able to speak for a full minute when she opened the box. She went downstairs at 8:15. In the lobby, the morning shift had begun. The bar was quiet. The marble floors reflected the overhead light. Behind the front desk, a different agent was working. A young man, early 20s, who smiled when she walked past and said, "Good morning," the way people do when they mean it. She nodded and continued toward the exit. She didn't know, at that moment, who was watching. Mireille Fontaine Okafor had been working as a lifestyle correspondent for Channel 6 Atlanta for 9 years, and she had developed, over those 9 years, a specific and reliable instinct for stories that were about to become bigger than they appeared. She was in the Hargrove lobby at 8:20 that morning because she was staying there herself. Her network had put her up for the conference, at which she was scheduled to conduct 2 on-camera interviews and file a segment on the emerging role of black women in infrastructure finance. It was, she had thought, when she'd received the assignment, either the most interesting story she'd been given in months, or a niche piece that would run at 6:52 on a Thursday and be forgotten by the weekend. She wasn't sure yet which. She saw Claudette cross the lobby. She recognized her immediately. Morel had watched the keynote address Claudette had given the previous year in Chicago. Had watched it twice, actually, because the first time she'd been half distracted, and the second time she'd paid attention and found herself thinking about it for days afterward. She knew the name. She knew the company. She knew the story in the broad strokes. Oakland, $12,000, 27 states. Because it was the kind of story that appeared in profiles and podcasts and was cited by other founders as evidence that something was still possible. What she didn't know was what had happened the previous afternoon. But she was a journalist, and she noticed things. And what she noticed as Claudette walked through that lobby was the particular way a person moves when they are carrying something they have decided not to put down. She didn't approach her that morning. She let her go. Instead, Murray went to the front desk and asked, in the most conversational tone she possessed, whether the hotel had experienced any issues with its reservation system the previous day. The young man at the desk looked uncertain. He said he wasn't aware of anything. She thanked him. She filed the question away. The panel went exactly as panels go when one of the panelists is operating on a different level than the occasion requires. There were 4 speakers. The moderator was a senior editor from a financial publication whose name Claudette recognized and whose work she had read. The questions were good. The other panelists were competent, well-prepared, thoughtful. The audience was attentive. And then it was Claudette's turn. She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. She spoke the way she had learned to speak over 30 years of being the person in the room, who had to be twice as prepared to be heard half as clearly, with a precision that left no room for misinterpretation and a stillness that made people lean forward rather than back. She talked about where infrastructure capital actually went and where it didn't. She talked about the 11 years it had taken to build something that the market now considered obvious. She talked about what it cost to keep going when the cost of stopping would have been so much lower. She talked about her mother's watch. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment, in the way rooms go quiet when they've received something they weren't expecting. Then the applause started. Mireille Fontaine Okafor, seated in the 3rd row, was recording on her phone. After the panel, Claudette took 3 meetings in a side room, agreed to 2 more for the following week, declined a lunch invitation she would have liked to accept because she had a call at noon she couldn't reschedule, and ate half a sandwich standing up in the corridor while answering a question from a young woman who had approached her with the particular kind of nervous courage that Claudette recognized because she had once possessed exactly that kind of nerve herself, directed at a woman she'd admired, who had spoken at a conference in Detroit and had no idea what she was building, and had no idea yet what she was building. She answered the young woman's question honestly. She gave her a card. She told her to follow up. Then she went back to the hotel. Morel found Kristen at 2:15. She didn't introduce herself as a journalist immediately. She simply asked, at the desk, whether she could speak to someone about a guest experience concern. Something she'd heard about, secondhand, that she thought the hotel might want to be aware of. Kristen was on shift. She was the one who came to the small office off the lobby where Morel waited. Morel asked her, gently, about the previous afternoon. About a guest who had arrived around 5 o'clock. About a Diamond Loyalty member with a confirmed suite reservation who had apparently had some difficulty checking in. Kristen's face did something clag, she said. There was a istum said. It resolved. I understand, Morel said. Can I ask, when the guest presented her confirmation number, what happened? The reservation came up. Right away? A pause. Yes. Morel nodded slowly. She thanked Kristen for her time. She left the office. She already had what she needed. She had, in fact, had it before she walked in. What she'd wanted was to see what Kristen would do when given the opportunity to say what had actually happened, and Kristen had answered that question by saying everything except the thing that mattered. At 4 o'clock, Mireille knocked on the door of suite 4217. Claudette opened it. She was in a different blazer now, working, her laptop open on the desk behind her. She looked at Mireille and then at the lanyard she was still wearing from the conference and said, "Reporter?" "Correspondent," Mireille said. "Channel 6. But I'm not here for the conference piece." She paused. "I'd like to talk to you about what happened yesterday when you checked in." Claudette didn't say anything for a moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. They talked for 40 minutes. Claudette was not emotional. She was precise. She described what had happened in the same way she described everything, sequentially, without ornamentation, with the kind of clarity that made it unnecessary for the listener to fill in anything. She didn't characterize Kristen. She didn't speculate about Kristen's intentions. She described what Kristen had done. Mireille 4 questions, with none of which were leading. She asked 4 questions, none of which were leading. She let the sit where it needed to sit. At the end of the 40 minutes, she asked, "What do you want people to understand about this?" Claudette was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window. The city had gone golden with late afternoon. "I want them to understand that it isn't about me," she said. "I'm fine. I have a suite on 42 and a keynote I delivered this morning and a company that does $4 billion a year. I'm fine," she paused. "But I was fine yesterday too, before any of that came up. I was fine the moment I walked into the lobby and someone looked at me and decided I wasn't. And I keep thinking about the person who doesn't have a confirmation email to show, who doesn't have a diamond account to pull up, who just walks in and gets told, in whatever way, that the space isn't for them. What happens to that person?" Mireille didn't answer. She didn't think Claudette was asking her to. The segment ran 2 days later. It was not the piece Mireille had been assigned. Her editor, when she called that evening to pitch the pivot, was quiet on the phone for a long moment and then said, "Send me what you have." She sent it. He watched it. He called back in 20 minutes. "This runs Friday," he said. "Main broadcast." It ran on Friday. It ran at 6:14, not 6:52. The slot reserved for things that mattered. It ran for 4 minutes and 38 seconds, which was long for a local segment, and it included Claudette's face and Claudette's voice and the specific and quiet weight of Claudette's words. And it included footage Mireille had obtained of the lobby. And it included a statement from the Hargrove Atlanta's corporate communications office that said, "The hotel took all guest experience concerns seriously and was conducting an internal review." By Saturday morning, the segment had been shared 47,000 times. By Sunday, it had been picked up by 3 national outlets. By Monday, the Hargrove Atlanta corporate office in Chicago had received over 2,000 emails, 1,200 of which came in the first 24 hours after the national pickup. The hashtag that appeared, organically, without anyone orchestrating it, was short and unambiguous, and it trended for 16 hours. On Monday afternoon, Claudette received a call from the chief executive of the Hargrove Hotel Group. His name was Raymond Ashby. She had met him once, briefly, at an industry event 3 years earlier. He was 61 years old and had been running the company for 9 years and had a reputation for being, by the standards of the hospitality industry, direct. He called her personal cell. She answered. "Mrs. Osei," he said. "I'm calling because I owe you an apology, and I want to give it to you directly, without a publicist in the room." She said nothing. "What happened to you should not have happened," he said. "I want you to know that I have watched the segment. I've also reviewed the check-in footage from the property, and I've read the account your correspondent described." He paused. "I'm not going to tell you it was an isolated incident. I don't know that it was. What I do know is that it shouldn't have happened and that the way my staff responded, when you showed the confirmation, the way the conversation continued, wasn't acceptable." Claudette said, I appreciate that. I also want to tell you, Raymond Ashmeshby said, that Kristen Mercer is no longer employed by the Hargrove Atlanta. Claudette was quiet for a moment. That wasn't something I asked for, she said. I know, he said. It was a decision made based on a pattern that predates your visit. Your visit was. It made something visible that had been easier to overlook. He paused. I don't expect this call to fix anything. I'm aware that it doesn't. No, Claudette said. It doesn't, but I wanted to make it anyway. There was a silence between them, not an uncomfortable one, which surprised her slightly. Mr. Ashby, she said, can I ask you something? Yes. When you reviewed the check-in footage, what did you see? He was quiet for a moment. I saw a woman who knew exactly who she was, being asked to prove it, he said. And I saw her do exactly that, with more composure than I would have had. Claudette didn't say anything to that. She thanked him and ended the call. What happened after was both more and less dramatic than the coverage suggested. The Hargrove Atlanta did not close. The Hargrove Hotel Group did not collapse. What happened was more specific and, in some ways, more significant than either of those things. OC Infrastructure Solutions had, over the previous 6 years, provided project finance and advisory services to 4 commercial real estate developments that included Hargrove-branded properties among their anchor tenants. The total value of those arrangements was not publicly disclosed. But the following Wednesday, Claudette's office sent formal notice that OIS would not be renewing its advisory relationship with the development firm that held those contracts when the current agreements lapsed at the end of the quarter. The development firm, whose principal was a man named Jeffrey Strand, who had known Claudette for 8 years, and who called her on Thursday to ask if there was any way to discuss the decision, was told, politely and without elaboration, that OIS was restructuring its partnership commitments and that the decision was final. Jeffrey Strand told 2 other people in his network. Those 2 people told others. Within 10 days, 2 additional firms in the commercial hospitality development space had quietly concluded that the moment to establish or deepen a relationship with OZ Infrastructure Solutions was not now. None of this made the news. None of it was meant to. The young woman who had approached Claudette in the corridor after the panel, her name was Anaya Dupree. She was 26. She was 18 months into building a logistics startup in Memphis with a co-founder she'd met in graduate school. Sent a follow-up email 9 days later. Claudette's assistant flagged it. Claudette read it herself. It was a good email. Specific, clear, not too long. It asked one question and didn't pretend to be asking something else. Claudette read it twice. She forwarded it to the partner at OAIS who handled early-stage investment relationships with a note that said, "Take a meeting with her." Listen carefully. She didn't know how that would turn out. She almost never did at the beginning. What she knew was that the email was the kind that deserved a door to open, and that she was in a position to open it, and that this, more than any segment or any trending hashtag or any phone call from a 61-year-old chief executive, was the thing that felt like power used correctly. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the night she had stood in her coat in the suite on the 42nd floor and stared at the cream-colored carpet, Claudette O.C. sat at a dinner in Washington, D.C., at a table of 12 people who were, collectively, responsible for decisions that shaped a meaningful portion of the country's infrastructure investment landscape. She was seated between a former Secretary of Transportation and a fund manager who ran one of the largest infrastructure-focused portfolios in the country. The conversation was good. The food was fine. At some point during the main course, the fund manager named Davis, who had a reputation for asking the questions other people in his position tended to avoid, leaned slightly toward her and said, "I saw the Channel 6 the hotel thing." Claudette looked at him. "I thought you handled it remarkably," he said. She considered several responses. She chose the simplest one. "I've been handling it my whole life," she said. "I just don't always have a camera nearby." Davis was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly, and turned back to his food. And Claudette picked up her fork And the conversation at the table moved on, and outside the windows of the restaurant, the city went on doing what cities do. Indifferent, relentless, and full of people who were, in that same moment, being asked in 1,000 different ways to prove that they belonged somewhere they had every right to be. Some of them had confirmation emails to show. Some of them didn't, and the distance between those two things was the story. Not the one that had trended for 16 hours, but the one that had been going on long before anyone turned on a camera and would keep going long after.